Here's Brody Brazil.
You know, in the middle of so much uncertainty about the A's, this process, their project, and a potential relocation to Las Vegas, there is one thing that we actually do know for sure, and that is time is quickly running out on everything that's been going on and everything that's still required to, make a vote happen by mid-November at the owners' meetings in Arlington, Texas. I mean, at this point here in early October, we are still without so much detail and specifics, at least publicly, about the project, the ambitions, how you're going to do a stadium on just 9 acres, where the team's going to play for a handful of years in the interim, and all of these challenges have been, well documented on this YouTube channel alone. But there's one aspect which hasn't been discussed a bunch, but recently did surface, and that is how do you do this stadium to the cost of $1.5 billion, but also give it that Vegas wow factor that's necessary for survival. I mean, look, even as just a visitor and a guest to Las Vegas, like me as an outsider, I totally understand what happens down there in the entertainment industry. Every time an entity comes out, it has to top the last thing that's comparable. Like if this was something that was made for visitors, well, the next thing has to be here and the next thing has to be here. Problem is, if you're the Oakland A's and your stadium venue is not going to open up for 5 more years and you kind of have to future-proof it, plan in advance, you've got to make it a pretty slick facility, and you're probably going to have to put it way up here, and you're probably going to have to spend way more than you initially anticipated. And yeah, look, $1.5 billion is a lot of money for a stadium on only 9 acres, but if it has a retractable roof and it has all the bells and whistles and technology, it's going to come at a pretty hefty price tag. Let's not forget what happened at the Sphere, which just opened. Took extra years, took a lot of extra money. Same thing with Allegiant Stadium when it opened up for the Raiders. They realized, hey, we actually need to put a little bit or a lot more money into this. But that complicates the matter for the A's, who, again, are trying to create this wow factor within a budget. Now, those are not my words. That comes to us from this piece in the Sports Business Journal, but I think that is said so perfectly about what they're trying to do here. The headline from the 2nd of October read, A's using an unconventional process for planning their new Vegas ballpark. And we're using that rendering still, which came out at the end of May because it had to, because the documentation and the bill was being presented to the Nevada State Legislature, right? The request for public funding. So the rendering had to come out. But by July, literally 2 months later, the A's deemed it worthless. Their designers said, hey, you can wad this up. We're not actually going to be operating on anything close to that rendering. That was just kind of for show. So I'm guilty of it too. I've used it within the last month or two. But that's the crazy part about this. We literally have no imagery to talk about this ballpark, so we are intentionally all using old imagery to discuss it. Not their fault, SBJ's fault, but I digress. Let's get into the piece here. Gensler and Bjarke Ingels Group, BIG, could, if fully unleashed, with no budgetary considerations, create baseball stadium renderings for the Athletics Las Vegas effort that would blow minds. Right, so there are some obvious limitations here. The size of the land, 9 acres. That's difficult, but you got to get really creative. But here is the specific attachment to the financing of it. If there were no budgetary considerations or constrictions, these designers could create renderings for the stadium effort that would blow minds. And Bjarke Ingels Group, if that name sounds familiar, they were the ones behind all of the different rounds of renderings for Howard Terminal. So they're creative, they're good at what they do. In fact, I will say this, though. I remember that they had said Bjarke Ingels had never done a baseball stadium like this before. So they're maybe new to the game, but their design techniques and tactics and everything else is first class. And I'm not as familiar with Gensler firsthand, but I know their work and I know they've been around too. But the point is here, these two design groups could go wild. They could unleash something crazy if there were no cost considerations. Gensler and BIG, Bjarke Ingels Group, whose team for the A's project includes HNTB as the architect of record, are in the latter stages of a design competition to win the A's $1.5 billion Las Vegas ballpark project. Whichever team of those two that the A's pick, by the way, A's President Dave Kaval expects the decision to be made in the second half of October. Now that's new information because initially, as recently as about a week or two ago, we heard that the design winner would be selected in early November. It's obviously been pushed up. Now, because of necessity or because they're ahead of schedule or even if they will come through by the end of this month, who knows? But I want to point out here that the date on that has changed as we understand it. Okay, so second half of October, they'll pick a designer which will produce a design created with significant input from contractors Mortenson and McCarthy and owner's rep CAA Icon, all three of which, somewhat unusually, were hired before the architects. This article will explain, usually this entire process happens in reverse. Not all the time, but usually the designer comes first, and then the architect, and then the builder. And there's some reasonings why this is happening in reverse here. Quote, to me, it's a very innovative process from ownership. They're wanting that certainty much earlier in the process, said Dan Wacker, head of pre-construction for Mortenson, right? Like they want to know the cost of this almost precisely before they go any further in the project. Quote, there are so many horror stories of projects getting out of control. And that I understand and can appreciate, but if you've ever been through any type of construction project, remodeling, home improvement project, you know how it goes. Over time, you add some upgrades. Look at Allegiant Stadium. They wanted to make it just a little bit better, so a couple $100 million more is what it took to get there. It seems like the A's already in this process are setting like almost like a salary cap, a really hard top limit on what this thing is going to cost. And here's the explanation of why things are maybe in reverse. Designers are usually hired first for sports venue projects because of their ability to articulate a foundational vision, right? To create something masterful, to wow you. In this case, renderings are aspirational, and team owners and the public can fall in love with them. That proves problematic if the concept design isn't tethered to the reality of a project's budget, which can result in contractors and project managers later taking a machete to the initial design to get its costs under control. Again, say what you want, but we've seen that over and over again. Wait, the renderings don't actually look like how the stadium turned out to be. Sometimes it's very close. Other times you're like, wait, this wasn't even in the same ballpark, so to speak. So I do understand the avoidance of that and why the A's are trying to get away from that. But in this case, it really seems like the limit is going to be hard on the cost. There are at least a handful of reasons why the A's have opted for a different approach in Vegas. First, owner John Fisher and Dave Kaval utilized a similar order of operations when building Ballpark for the San Jose Earthquakes less than a decade ago, and in designing their proposed ballpark at Howard Terminal in Oakland, which ultimately did not materialize. Two things to add here, and I'll begin with Ballpark, formerly Avaya Stadium when it opened for the San Jose Earthquakes. It's been recently commented on by A's and Earthquakes owner John Fisher that in the decade or so that it's been open, it didn't necessarily have all of the bells and whistles and amenities that provided the team with enough value to go ahead and turn that around and spend it on more players and products. So even the design there maybe was undercooked to a certain degree already in its first decade of existence. And the other part about it is I'm not so sure about Howard Terminal that a builder or an architect were ever hired for the project. So much has happened, and it wasn't that long ago. I'd really have to go back and quadruple check, but I'm pretty sure that the designer was hired first. Bjarke Ingels Group had provided a number of different rounds of renderings, and I don't know that there was ever a builder or an architect officially on board for Howard Terminal. So I don't know about the second half of that. Obviously, the first half of that, with the Quake Stadium, it didn't necessarily turn out in the best possible way. Second, sticking to the budget may be even more important in this case because the A's are controversially... Wait, what's the controversy here? Explain more on that. No, I'm all ears. I've got all day. No, I'm just kidding. I understand there's a lot of controversy behind this. Controversially moving from Oakland to Las Vegas, provided Major League Baseball approves the relocation. The ballpark will likely receive substantial public funding to the tune of $380 million. The state of Nevada has pledged. I'm also going to say Clark County is a huge part of that $380 million too. So making a positive first impression in the team's new hometown by being shrewd stewards of the public money would be an advisable move. Yes and no. Yes, in a sense that you don't want to come out with a ballpark that has a $380 million like Bellagio water fountain or waterfall structure in the front. Look what we spent all your public money on. You don't want that. But you also don't want to go so cheap on the stadium that it looks like you took most of that 380, or you took all of it, but you applied that as the majority source of the project. Like, I think in this case, the public money would feel best if it were matched to a nice, healthy, generous amount of financing, of private financing, to get this stadium to work. And I'm not discounting even $1.1 billion, which sounds like it's the plan. But my point is here, the article might be a little bit off base by saying that you don't want to spend that 380 irresponsibly. I agree. You don't want to do something crazy here, but you want to spend, there is a fine line. What that number is, I don't know, but you do want to still spend a significant amount of money to know that that 380, it wasn't cheap, but it also wasn't all of it, and you made the most out of that 380 by matching as much as you needed to from the private side. Hopefully that makes sense. The relocation itself will be expensive. But really? I'd love to go into the books on that one. What? Moving a team, is that expensive? Just the office spaces? It's going to come at some cost. But in the sphere of a $1.5 billion stadium and a $300 million relocation fee, which may or may not be waived. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that earlier. A couple $1 million to move your team, I would think, is all it is. The relocation itself will be expensive, meaning there is likely less wiggle room for stadium project overages. And the funky inflationary economy is a risk for the project's managers too, right? So they've got to commit to, well, we can build it for this cost. What if things change? I mean, and there's so much time. In another 2, 3, 4+ years, the cost of materials or labor, like there's a lot of tough predictions and projections to get right here. Additionally, there is the climate element. Provided the A's clinch their move to Las Vegas, at least half, if not more, of the MLB season will be too hot to play outdoors, which means the new stadium requires a retractable roof, an expensive addition to the project's scope. And that's why I've been saying all along, don't be surprised if it goes from the retractable conversation to the fixed roof dome conversation pretty quickly in the very near future. Efficiently and sustainably controlling the building's climate in a roasting desert environment will be equally challenging. Because of that, structural engineers Thornton, Tomasetti, and mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineers Henderson were also brought on before the designers were chosen, a reversal of the usual order in which sports venue project teams are assembled. Now, on one hand, you can say they just want all the answers up front. On another side of it, you can see that they are operating on, again, a very strict budget here, a very hard limit of how much they're looking to spend here. If approved, the A's Vegas ballpark is scheduled to open in 2028. A casino, the Tropicana, on the site would need to be demolished, which adds about a year to the project timeline. You would think a year is plenty enough time to demolish something, level it, and get it away, and grade the site. What if that even goes longer than expected? Again, the timeline of all this was said to be 2028 at best, at earliest. We'll keep a close eye on that, and these initial stages are very important to the end timeline. Brad Schrock, a member of the A's organization and longtime sports venue architect who's led HOK's sports design practice and founded 2 other sports design firms, is serving as an intermediary for CAA Icon, the contractors, the engineers, and soon the winning design team. Schrock was crucial in helping the team make some big-picture early decisions, enabling Wacker to create a budget and framework within which the design teams then commence their creative work. Right? So before you guys start drawing, there's going to be some very particular limitations on this project, not just in the site, but also how fancy and how elaborate it can be. So if the A's new stadium in Vegas ends up with a moat, it'll be because it fit the budget. Let me just go back and read that last part, one more time here to really let that sink in. You understand that designers want to be free. They want to create something wild, but also something doable. But it says here, if the A's new stadium in Vegas ends up with a moat, which it's not going to end up with a moat, but if it had something cool like that, it'll only be because it fit the budget. And look, a budget is part of anything and everything. You're not a responsible individual if you're not operating on some sort of a budget. Let's be very honest about that. But in this case, it sounds like this is another factor of the project being successful or not, is the budget. Quote, there's always the risk of do we come in and take away the wow factor? And I don't think we're doing that, said Wacker, right? Part of the engineering side, the construction side, the architect side. We're looking for the wow factor within the budget. That's highlighted in neon green for the sole reason, like it's the main point of this video. That's just the approach of the ballpark right now in Las Vegas. They're trying to do as much as they possibly can with the limitations of 9 acres and with the limitations of a certain dollar figure that they just do not want to exceed. And I'm not here to spend other people's money or tell them how to do it. Maybe they can make magic for $1.5 billion. But I say at what cost? I don't mean at what financial cost. At what cost of cutting corners is it going to take to really keep that limit as firm as they want it to be? Well, you can't do this. You wanted that? You can't do that. And in the Las Vegas atmosphere and ecosystem, one thing always has to top the next. And if you're very stingy about where that top end is, I'm just saying, I'm just suggesting, and me with no design or contractor experience, but enough to understand how projects go. If you're setting the limit already, what challenges will this project really be up against? So the wow factor within the budget is definitely a thing for this Las Vegas ballpark project. You made it here to the end of the video. You know I appreciate that. Thumbs up down below. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this channel so I can definitely see you back here next time.